NBC's Monica Elba is in Washington, D.C. Retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Peter Zwack, former U.S. senior defense attaché to the Russian Federation. And Tim Miller is with us, host of the Bulwark podcast and an MSNBC political analyst. Okay, Melanie, what do we know about what senators want to know this afternoon? What are they clamoring to hear?
Yeah, well, there's quite a lot, actually, that senators want to learn. And that is because up until this point, the majority of members of Congress still have not received a classified briefing on the situation on Iran. And that includes top Democratic members of the leadership. So there are a number of questions, the top one being just how successful was the operation? How successful were the strikes? Does Iran have the capability to build a nuclear bomb? And if so, how long would it take them? Here's some more senators weighing in ahead of the briefing.
I'm not sure there's some questions that we all want answered. It can be answered. But I don't think anybody knows the extent of the damage yet, other than that it is substantial.
It doesn't make a lot of sense to throw a bunch of information out there when you don't have the answers. That's why you create this controversy, within the press about what actually happened.
So we'll see just how satisfied lawmakers are with the information they receive. The briefers today are scheduled to be Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, as well as the CIA director and General Kane. So a pretty wide mix there. Lawmakers were at least happy with that list. But this briefing also does come at a time of heightened tension between Congress and the administration, with reports that the White House might restrict some of its intelligence sharing with members on Capitol Hill after that initial assessment of the bomb damage was leaked. And even Speaker Johnson appears to be supportive of such a move. He told our Ryan Nobles moments ago that this is something they are working through and that he suspects the leak did come from Congress, although it's unclear whether he actually has any evidence to support that claim.
Well, that would seem to be a key question, Melanie. But General, let me go on to the complaints that we have been hearing from Democrats who are saying, frankly, that they don't have the information that they need. Tell us why these briefings, classified briefings, are important, and whether you think earlier is better.
Yes. First of all, those briefings should be classified and in no way shared with the public. And that way you can sort of get at the root of the intelligence, the fusion, and all of that. This time, White House was too soon out of the gate with the initial report from DIA, and I'm not sure how that initial DIA report came out. It certainly wasn't coordinated. It's normally you want to get a fused effort of the different intelligence agencies, but there's also an urgency to get the word up the leadership chain. In this case, we can see already, again, the first report is always wrong. It was sort of a sarcastic thing we used to say in Army intelligence, of which I was a member 34 years. So there's fog of information right now, and we need to be, straight-eyed on it and not get out into the public this contentiousness that we've got right now.
There is a lot of contentiousness, as you know, Tim, on one hand. Just today, Secretary Hegseth criticized that initial assessment, saying, look, it came out only a day and a half after the actual strikes. And yet Donald Trump's assessment that the sites were obliterated came even sooner. It came that night when he spoke to the American people. What do you make of Secretary Hegseth's update this morning?
Yeah. Look, just the lack of seriousness of Secretary Hegseth and just this feeling that you've got to butter up President Trump and you've got to make him feel like he was right and you've got to make him feel strong, like we're living in some country where you have a king or a dictator who needs to be sucked up to it. It feels un-American and unserious rather. And you can see the contrast just this morning in the press briefings between the Secretary of Defense and General Kane, who gave a detailed, thoughtful analysis of what we know and don't know. about the extent of the damage with regards to the nuclear facilities, and so it's possible to do it. We've seen it. You saw it in Trump 1.0, where, for all of my criticisms of it, there were some serious people, like General Mattis, that, did not play along with this reality show. And unfortunately, in this term, you have this very serious issue. We're dealing with life or death. We're dealing with nuclear weapons, with war, with geopolitics. And the fact that you have to have a Secretary of Defense go out on TV and, berate the media like they're children and do all this puffery about the president, to me, it shows a lot of insecurity and just a lack of seriousness in the Pentagon.
Monica, the president called this morning's Pentagon event, that press conference, the most confirming news conference he's ever seen. But what are we actually learning? What did we actually learn from Pete Hegseth?
Yeah, well, specifically, I think it's what Tim was just talking about. You had the defense secretary playing a little bit more of the political role, going out there and putting on a bit of a show for the president and talking about this in the broader terms. They did talk a little bit more about some of that information that the CIA director had put out overnight that was essentially backing up the president's initial assessment that these structures had been so severely damaged that it could set back Iran's nuclear program for years, again, in contrast to the initial assessment. But we got actual details from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane. He was far more specific, and he even said in his remarks, which I thought was really notable, that he has never been susceptible to political pressure, that he has never felt this outside influence of needing to tell the president something that he wanted to hear, that he simply has been presenting him just with the information so that he can make the best decisions that he can. But here's a little bit more from Pete Hegseth on how he approached all of this.
Those that do proper assessments recognize that what the United States military did was historic. First reports are almost always wrong. They're almost always incomplete, right? Anything, whether it's a squad level operation or a strategic level operation, the initial reflections you get are coming at you at a high rate of speed from a lot of different sources. So your job is to step back and assess them.
And so I would just note the irony there in the Pentagon chief's own comments there that essentially first reports are always wrong. He's arguing when there was the president and some of his top aides who came out and tried to give all of these definitive assessments in the very early hours and days before we have a complete picture, which, as we know, is really going to take a substantial amount of time. Chris.
General, as someone who has worked with secretaries of defense, if the Secretary of Defense sees as his key role to present information to the American public, is that, in your experience, the main role that one should serve? Because it did seem at the press conference today, 10 minutes at the start, going after the media and praising President Trump, that is where he sees his role.
The Secretary of Defense has a huge role, but it should be coordinated with the Director of National Intelligence, DNI, and their staff. And it should be a good coordinated position with the number of defense intelligence agencies that fall, if you will, under DOD's auspices. So you got to be careful and guarded. And you got to be careful before you proclaim this or that until the intel is fully fused. Fusion. That's all the intelligence. That's imagery, and it's signal intelligence and human intelligence and technical intelligence. That takes time. And there are agencies in DOD that do that. I'm sad. I think it got too politicized too fast and has diminished somewhat, really, the extraordinary role of the military in coordinating, planning, and delivering those massive bombs.
And it was actually Secretary Kane who gave us more information about that today, and the details are so impressive. Tim, the American people watching this, trying to figure out what's real, what's not real, what's the truth, what isn't. There's a new NBC News Decision Desk poll. It shows that more Americans are against these strikes, 45 opposed as opposed to 38 who support them. 60% believe that the president should have sought congressional authorization. But I wonder, what do Democrats do with that? What does any member of Congress do with that? Do the American people have any say in this?
Sure. Yeah, the American people have say. The degree to which it's unpopular, I think, is as demonstrated. That has an impact on President Trump. He's responsive. We've seen that in other areas, whether it be the tariffs or elsewhere, where he's putting forth something that's unpopular and then he backed off of it. Though not completely. And so I do think that matters. Honestly, this is a moving situation, right? And I think that you see in the polls kind of mixed information, right? I think the American people, if it's a short, contained strike that just goes after the Iran nuclear facilities, and there's no, nothing beyond that, that's going to be more supportive. People are going to be more supportive of that. If things escalate, which they had, well, they did slightly with the missile attacks going between Iran and Israel, but not in a way that's affected, American troops or Americans. But if things escalate to the fact that that it does have an impact on Americans, I do think that will greatly impact the poll numbers, which will greatly impact President Trump. So, like a lot similarly to the intelligence, kind of the polling on this is still, in development. And I think that the impact, we'll know more in the coming weeks, and it will be affected a lot by what the real facts on the ground are.